This is the Capitol Rundown.
At the end of the day, people do not go into the booth and say, I'm going to vote for the gubernatorial candidate because they picked X for lieutenant governor.
Wyoming wants a representative fighting to put America first, to put Wyoming first, to put you first.
I will do whatever it takes to ensure Donald Trump is never again anywhere near the Oval Office.
It's all straight ahead. The Capitol Rundown starts now.
Well, thanks for joining us for this week's edition of the Capitol Rundown. I'm Lauren Thompson. Governors have to make many important decisions, and one of the biggest choices they have to make is one of their first, and that is who is the person they think can take over for them if for some reason they won't be able to finish the job. Well, this week, Republican nominee Tudor Dixon made her choice. His name is Shane Hernandez. He served 2 terms in the Michigan House of Representatives between 2017 and 2021, representing part of the Thumb, including Port Huron, where he lives. During his time in the House, he served as chair of the House Appropriations Committee and House Fiscal Governing Committee. He left the Michigan House to run for the U.S. House of Representatives in 2020, but he finished second in the Republican primary to Lisa McClain, who then went on to win the seat. Before taking office, he worked at an architectural firm in Port Huron. He graduated from Lawrence Technical University and is a married father of 2. Hernandez describes himself as a conservative Republican who believes in limited government, fiscal responsibility, and individual liberties. He also believes life begins at conception. In announcing her pick, Dixon said, quote, Shane Hernandez as lieutenant governor will help to improve our schools, create safer communities, and improve our economy. Like me, Shane is concerned about the impact rising prices are having on our families. Well, Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic has been covering governors and lieutenant governors for 50 years now. So we asked him about the politics behind this pick. Here's what he had to say.
The popular wisdom in our town is that candidate Tudor Dixon, with no legislative experience, needed somebody at her side that could fulfill that part of the resume as she runs to get this job. She is going to a former state lawmaker, a Republican who chaired the House Appropriations Committee, and his name is Shane Hernandez, the father of 2 daughters from over in the Port Huron area. Most recently, an unsuccessful candidate running for Congress. She looked at a number of people that did have legislative experience and did not, such as some NBA basketball players. But at the end of the day, really, you can't come into this job as governor without somebody on your inner circle who's been there, done that. And while Mr. Hernandez does not have a wealth of legislative experience, he certainly has more than the candidate. And this will help her to navigate what's going on. Now, what kind of guy is he? We covered Mr. Hernandez when he was chair of the House Budget Committee. Very easy to get along with. He was approachable. You could talk to him. He didn't run and hide. And he was measured in what he is doing and how he does it. He's not a bomb thrower. Next weekend, we'll find out if the Trumpers in the Republican Party are willing to go along with Mr. Hernandez as the running mate with Tudor Dixon. She hopes that they will vote yes. If they don't, that's quite another story. Here for you in Lansing, Tim Skubic, 6 News.
Well, the candidates for governor didn't cross paths in person this week as Governor Whitmer campaigned up in the UP, but that didn't stop the two from getting into a little dust-up. It came after Governor Whitmer proposed a tax holiday on back-to-school items earlier this week. Schools already started in some districts, and most of the rest start in just a couple of weeks. The Michigan legislature, which would need to approve the plan, isn't set to meet again until after Labor Day. Dixon called the proposal a gimmick that's, quote, too little, too late, and a, quote, desperate public relations stunt. Well, we're also getting a look at the issues that are important to voters, and no surprise, members of each party have different priorities. A poll conducted on behalf of the AARP shows that it's a close race among voters 50 and older. It shows Gretchen Whitmer with a 5-point lead over Tudor Dixon. Whitmer has a big lead among women. Dixon, however, leads among men. The vote is also divided by the issues that are most important to people.
But Republicans gravitate towards inflation, immigration, and taxes and spending. Democrats on their list, abortion tops it at 21%, followed by Social Security and Medicare, and voting rights.
Well, coming up here on the Capitol Rundown, we talk to one of the men who wants to represent Michigan in Washington, why he thinks you should oust an incumbent to send him to D.C. Stay tuned. That's next. Well, as we head toward the midterm election, there's a big race shaping up in one of the state's biggest districts. This new 5th district includes 7 Michigan counties, and it runs along the entire southern border of the state. Well, this is where current Congressman Tim Walberg is facing a challenge from newcomer Bart Goldberg. We caught up with Congressman Walberg shortly after the August primary. Today, we hear from his opponent to get his take on the race.
This new district that you're running in, District 5, is a new district. What is your take on the district itself and the makeup of this new territory?
The thing that everyone says at first when they learn about District 5 is just huge. I mean, it goes from Lake Michigan to Lake Erie. I live on Lake Michigan, so it's a 220-mile drive when I go to Monroe over along Lake Erie. You know, by and large, I find that the people in the 5th district are of very like minds. It's not like you've got areas where there's very different interests than other areas. So it's just a good American district.
And what are your thoughts on going up against Congressman Walberg, who has spent many years in Congress?
Obviously, he's going to be a worthy opponent. He has great experience. He has a lot of funding. That's going to make it very difficult. But I just think that there are a lot of people that are looking for I'm a moderate Democrat. There's a lot of people looking for a real moderate, such as myself.
What is your game plan going into November? It's coming from a campaign standpoint to take on Congressman Walberg and his funding.
You start by just meeting as many people as you can. Right now, we're in county fair season. And so I'm putting a lot of miles on the old Bronco and going to a lot of county fairs, corn dogs, pretzels, lemonade, meeting a lot of people that are interested in the moderate. So you start with that. And then from there, I just want to visit as many of the small towns that I can.
The fact that this is a midterm election, and historically, midterm elections tend to go for the party that is not in the White House. Do you think that adds an extra hurdle for you?
Certainly, that's the norm, but this year is going to be an absolute aberration. I think in the record book someday they're going to put a big asterisk by this one, and there's a number of reasons, but the biggest one by far was when the Supreme Court overruled Roe versus Wade. When I first took this on, I said I did it out of duty, right? And at the time, I knew I was an underdog, but a lot has happened since then to really change it. And I think this is going to be a year where the Democrats in Michigan really do some good.
Well, still ahead here on the Capitol Rundown, President Biden signs a big bill into law. We'll tell you why Democrats are happy, Republicans are sad, and most importantly, what's all in it for you? Stay with us. We'll be right back. Well, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law on Tuesday. Democrats say it will lower energy and health care costs, but Republicans in Congress oppose the legislation, calling it a tax and spending spree. Our Washington correspondent Rashad Hudson joins us now with a look at what the bill does and reaction from both sides.
Good morning. The new law is being celebrated by White House officials and climate advocates. The next step will be trying to sell it to the American people.
With this law, the American people won and the special interests lost.
Tuesday, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law, calling the massive climate, health, and tax legislation historic.
It's about delivering progress and prosperity to American families.
Joining the president were key Democratic lawmakers who helped push the bill across the finish line, like West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin.
I said, it's not a green bill, it's not a blue bill, it's a red, white, and blue bill. It really is.
It's the nation's largest investment in climate. It directs nearly $400 billion in climate and energy programs with tax credits and incentives to cut emissions by 40% over the next 8 years.
And it's going to mitigate the climate crisis. It's going to protect our families.
The bill passed Congress with no Republican support. Missouri Congressman Jason Smith called the bill a reckless spending spree.
So lots of spending up front, lots of debt up front, and then maybe savings 8 years from now.
With less than 3 months until the November midterm elections, President Biden plans to hit the road in the coming weeks to explain what's in the landmark piece of legislation. Reporting in Washington, Rashad Hudson, back to you.
Well, Michigan Democrats continued to celebrate the new law, saying that along with inflation, it will lower energy and health care costs. Michigan Senator Debbie Stabenow and Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin joined local health officials in Lansing earlier this week to highlight some of the reforms. Now, they include allowing the government to negotiate with drug companies for lower prices and buy prescription pills in bulk, lowering prescription drug costs for Medicare patients, capping Medicare out-of-pocket costs, and allowing people to spread their costs over monthly payments. Now, it will also cap the amount people spend on Medicare on insulin, and Stabenow says that's a lot of people.
There are 2 million Michiganders that rely on Medicare. We have 1 in 3 people on Medicare in Michigan who have diabetes. And the good news starts in January for them because their out-of-pocket cost for insulin is going to be capped at $35 a month. $35 a month.
Stabenow and Slotkin say the measure is paid for by new taxes on large companies and stepped up IRS enforcement on the wealthy. Well, coming up, we'll talk about a race out west that's got Washington talking. And we'll talk about what it meant for our political poll here in Michigan. The Capitol Rundown. We'll be right back. We now return to Washington by way of Wyoming. The Cowboy State picked its candidates for the November election this week, and there'll be a new face representing them in Congress next year. It will almost certainly be this woman, Harriet Hageman. She ousted incumbent Liz Cheney in that state's Republican primary, and the state is so overwhelmingly Republican that her election in November is practically guaranteed. Former President Donald Trump won 70% of the vote there in 2020, and it's his support of the lawyer over Cheney, who has been a longtime critic of Trump, that put Hageman over the top.
We want a representative in Washington, D.C. that is focused on protecting Wyoming and on furthering our agenda. Wyoming wants a representative fighting to put America first, to put Wyoming first, to put you first, and I am that representative.
But Cheney, who lost by a margin of more than 2-1, says she'll continue to do her work on the January 6th committee as long as she's in Congress. And the buzz is that she may mount her own bid for the White House to try and sink the former president.
2 years ago, I won this primary with 73% of the vote. I could easily have done the same again, but it would have required that I go along with President Trump's lie about the 2020 election. That was a path I could not and would not take. I will do whatever it takes to ensure Donald Trump is never again anywhere near the Oval Office, and I mean it.
With Cheney's loss, however, goes another one of the 10 House Republicans who voted for President Trump's impeachment, and that includes 2 congressmen from Michigan. One of them is Fred Upton, who by the time he leaves office early next year will have represented Michigan for 30 years. He chose to retire. But the other one, like Cheney, was forced out by voters. Peter Meyer, who is running for only his 2nd term, lost to John Gibbs in the race for the Republican nomination. It was close. Meyer had just over 48% of the vote. Gibbs had slightly more than 51%. Like Hageman, Gibbs had the endorsement of former President Trump. Gibbs has worked for the federal government before. He was an assistant secretary at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, but he has never held office before. Gibbs will face Democrat Hillary Scholten. Meyer's loss leaves only 2 of the 10 Republican members of Congress who voted for Trump's impeachment still in office. Well, when you think of politics in Michigan and Washington, you probably think of our capitals. Coming up next, we'll tell you about 2 big stories, one in each place, that are playing out in the courts. That's in the Capitol Rundown. Return. But before we go, we wanted to talk about some important political stories, but instead of playing out in back rooms, they're happening in courtrooms. So we start with the story of Mar-a-Lago. Now, this comes after the FBI served a search warrant at the home of former President Donald Trump in search of classified documents. A judge already released the warrant, but many people have called on him to release affidavits, the stories of people whose testimony led to those warrants. The judge wants to make at least some of that information public and has asked government lawyers to propose redactions before making that move.
Judge Reinhart seemed to have a very good sense that it is his job as the gatekeeper in this case to perform his function of balancing the interest in the public of accessing these materials against the interest in the government in keeping them secret.
Government lawyers oppose making the affidavits public, however. They say it could jeopardize their case and that affidavits aren't typically released until later on in the legal process. Well, meanwhile, another closely watched case is happening in a Grand Rapids courtroom. We're talking about the second trial of two men accused of planning to kidnap Governor Whitmer. The first trial against Adam Fox and Barry Croft ended with a hung jury, so federal prosecutors are trying again. FBI agents took the stand this week along with two men who pleaded guilty in the case. They told a jury that contrary to what the defense says, Fox and Croft led the effort and they were not pushed into it by FBI informants.
That'll be for the jury to sort out what happened and what those guys had to say. But it's a tragedy all the way around.
What do you think about their testimony? Does it hurt your entrapment defense?
Well, I can't really comment on their testimony. That's ultimately for the jury.
The defense wrapped up its case on Friday, so closing arguments are set for Monday. And if you're interested in getting more political news from Michigan and Washington, we have just the thing for you. You can sign up for our Capitol Rundown newsletter. It's just one email each week, and you can get it by pointing your cell phone camera at the screen right now. This will take you to the sign-up page, or you can head to WLNS.com/newsletters. Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching the Capitol Rundown. We hope you'll join us again next week.